So right off the bat, my question is, I had that little matrix there of things that were urgent, not urgent, important, not important. So in the last year when it came to onboarding, what shifts did you see on that front? What was important that became not important? What things were urgent that became not urgent, and the other way around? That makes sense.
I'll happily start. I think this is a big question, and certainly this last year brought more changes, probably in L&D in any single year. And I think we've all seen changes in remote and how you have to adapt to e-onboarding, remote onboarding. But one note I took for this question in particular that I think gets overlooked is the urgency of training on internal tools. We have some interesting data that we share at LinkedIn often of we're spending 20 to 40% more time, and that's not COVID. That's not part of a COVID change on internal tools as those get more complex and employees need to do more with some of these third-party tools we're bringing in or tools that the companies have built internally for themselves. Can you hear me? I just saw a comment. It looks okay. Yeah. Okay. And training on skills and some of the corporate values and things that are part of onboarding, it's great in person. It can be done in a forum like this. I can tell you what it's done. What's I think more difficult is some of that internal tool training and moving that to something like remote. We pick up a lot of how we use those tools from buddies in person, from watching people work. And when you think of tools like a Salesforce or something that has basically infinite ways to use it, you don't need to use all those. And I don't want to send you on a learning journey of how to use Salesforce. I want you to know, here's what we want you to do with Salesforce or Tableau or something in your role. And I need to figure out how to help you get there without being near you, without watching over you. And I think that's become very urgent for companies to try to figure out. So I thought that was a unique one. I wanted to share that, and very curious to hear what the rest of the panelists say.
Yeah, just adding to what Eric said, I think, what came up for me as sort of in that important quadrant is really the planning of the onboarding experience and really trying to think about what experience you want to create and what steps are going to be necessary. Even from the beginning of the sort of the pre-onboarding, making sure that all the information is available to the candidate or the successful candidate, the new employee coming on, kind of putting yourself in their shoes and understanding what questions, what concerns they might have even before their first day. How am I going to get access on my first day? How am I going to get my equipment? What should I prepare in advance that I'm going to need to know to be successful? Right from the very beginning, just anticipating what questions, what tools, what resources they might need for success, and having that conversation really early and laying out the plan for them really early so that they can feel comfortable and feel empowered to be prepared to start and be successful.
And I think just to add to that, the biggest thing that I've seen the shift to important and urgent is that hiring managers and the new person's manager need to be so much more intentional about how much time they put in with the new employee. I don't like saying that this wasn't important and it wasn't urgent, but if you had a new employee that was starting and you were in an office, you would naturally get time with them. You would naturally check in with them. You'd walk past their desk in the morning and say, hey, how's it going? You would probably go out for lunch with them, or they'd go out look for lunch with some colleagues. There are a whole, 100 different touch points in an average week that a manager would normally have with a new kind of team member that almost don't exist in the remote world. So what I've been having to do a lot of encouragement with people that are hiring through us, is to really be intentional about how much time you plan in, or that they plan in with their new hire. So, almost it really has felt over the top for some of them, planning in, kind of 15-minute checkpoints, either a couple of times a day or every day for the first couple of weeks. But the people that I've seen not do that have then scrabbled to recover a couple of weeks later, or had some pretty disengaged people. So yeah, can't emphasize that enough. Just really like being overly intentional about scheduling time with the new people.
Yeah, like great use of the word intention. As Becca mentioned there, yeah, we'll also have like a Q&A portion as well. So if you do have any questions for the panel, go ahead and pop them in the chat there. What did you find most surprising over the last year with everything that changed on the front of onboarding?
I can jump in here. I think my answer sort of segues really well from Noel, what he was talking about intention. And I think, it's not necessarily surprising, but just how much this year emphasized the importance of being intentional about creating personal relationships and maintaining personal relationships. When you're, talking through emails and chats and having these very transactional interactions with people, you miss that opportunity to learn a little bit more about them or just be aware of what's going on in their lives. That might give you a little more empathy towards the people that you're working with, and patience and understanding and all those things. I think, it's not necessarily that it was surprising, but it was just really, really emphasized and important to be intentional about making sure that you're maintaining and cultivating those relationships with people.
Mm-hmm.
I think, again, so much surprise along the way. What I thought about this was I was surprised at how quickly companies I work with and peers I know in the L&D space normalized remote onboarding as not a Band-Aid. Like, we're not just doing this to get through X number of unknown months. We are going to invest in this program as a real, legitimate, and potentially semi-permanent, or parts being semi-permanent or permanent way of doing onboarding. And I think that that's huge for the future, because we just saw how many people responded that they're looking at a hybrid workforce, and for talent managers across organizations, having a strong remote onboarding they can trust means they're going to be more confident going out to find a candidate in a different city, in a different country, coming from a different place, because they can do that. I think one missing piece to that, and I think the next few years will come in, is the data, the people analytics around, is the remote onboarding working better, as well, worse than when we did it in person? What changes are we making? I think this year normalized it. People put all hands on deck. We made it, but we haven't figured out a great way to track the success of it. And that's going to have to come, and it's going to have to show that, yes, we made a great program remotely and it's working very well. And here's how we know. So project for the next few years.
I think on my side, it's surprise, but also disappointment, actually, that a lot of very big corporate companies are kind of what I would describe as being really cheap when it comes to kind of ergonomic and health and safety of kind of new employees. So, I have a foot in both camps, in the smallest, most nimble startups and, the biggest kind of multinational corporates. And it is amazing me that it's not the startups that are bootstrapped with low budget that are being kind of cheap about this. It's the big corporates that are going, yeah, I don't want to send a, kind of a 24-inch monitor to someone's desk, or a laptop stand, or we're not going to sort them out with office chairs. And, hopefully people will look after their own wellness. And obviously there's, kind of teams like Eric's kind of focusing on wellness when you're at home. But yeah, that has been really disappointing, actually, how kind of how little focus a lot of big companies have done on it. And it is, if you're kind of spending 8 hours a day at a laptop screen, sat on the dining room table without the right equipment, it's genuinely dangerous, and it's not good for kind of long-term health. And so, yeah, if any of the audience here are in one of those companies that's kind of, got execs that have been a bit cheap about, what is really not expensive to do it well, then, really encourage that, because the long-term effects are pretty hefty.
Mm-hmm. So a question here from chat, something came up. So for the ongoing onboarding / check-in interviews, who do you think should be conducting them? A manager, the buddy, an HR rep, someone else, case by case? What would you guys do in that situation? What does your current organization do or suggest?
Really know.
I would say everyone. So this should be like continual feedback for me. So ideally you'd have, one way of bringing it in. So I think the manager should be doing it formally, maybe, but, the buddy should be checking in, HR should be checking in, because, the new employee is going to feel a different level of comfort with different people and will definitely say things to the buddy that they might not say to the manager. So it should just be ingrained. How are people doing? Including asking for feedback on the onboarding process. How are we doing? What could we have done better in the first 2 weeks? So that you can then fix it for that person, but also so you can make it better for the next person, because it's probably a long time since you went through the onboarding process, whereas they are living and breathing it right now. So yeah, for me, it should be, continual with every person that engages with them.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't agree more. I think there's different perspectives and different information is going to be useful to each person who has those questions. And so from a people and culture perspective, we're going to be really interested in sort of the overall process. What worked well, what can we do, from a company level versus a manager has a real learning opportunity to grow and develop as a leader by asking some of those questions. So I think it's so important to get different perspectives and the buddy as well. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the optimal is just as much feedback and data as you can get to make sense. I think the caveat there is just try to keep it semi-consistent. So you can certainly change every 6-12 months, but if you're changing what that feedback mechanism looks like all the time, you're never going to have a sort of baseline of data that you can compare against. So think about some consistency for at least a little while.
So another question that I think is a bit related to it is, from Bert, thank you from the chat, do you find that remote onboarding takes longer than typical in-person onboarding? And if so, what are contributing factors, the increase in time? So Carla, I'm kind of curious what your experience is, because I know you joined right around when, the lockdown started to occur. But I'm curious with everyone, of course, but how was that like for everyone there? What have you found on that front?
Yeah, I think in some ways, certain aspects take longer because you're not having that opportunity to get in a room and have lunch with 10 people at once and have a sort of informal chat with a larger group of people. So there's more, one-on-one Teams meetings or Zoom meetings or whatnot that you need to take that time to be able to connect with people. And, in other ways, it's been rather convenient to be able to schedule things now that everyone's virtual and at home. Like you can access people, I find, a little more easily. So, and even chat to have, be able to reach out to someone with a question on chat, and the uptake on using those chat mechanisms has been pretty significant within our group. We had a few people engaging in Microsoft Teams chat prior to the COVID and the shutdown, but ever since then, ever since everyone went home, we've had everybody on chat, so you can access people a lot more easily. So it's a little bit of both, but I think overall, I would say it takes longer to develop those relationships when you don't have an opportunity to bump into someone in the coffee room and have a quick chat with people.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really interesting question. I think if the question is, do I think it takes longer for somebody to get to a point of skill to do their role remotely or in person, I'd say yes, it will likely take longer remotely for all of the reasons that Carla just listed off. But do I think a remote onboarding program needs to be longer than an in-person program? That's a little bit of a different question in a way. And I think as a person working on a learning program, it's up to you to try to think through that timeline and really in some ways defend it. If you're in a position where your company's saying we need these people to start as quickly as possible, you have to work with that, but that's not exactly a training or remote or in-person issue. That's sort of a talent pipeline issue where there's just an absolute sudden urgent need to get people into a role. But Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think, as Carla said, there you miss out on the social parts, which is where the buddy can really come in. If there's any kind of informal huddle, Slack room, Teams room, you have to get in there and you have to depressure them from understanding everything happening, but to be at least a spectator in that. But I don't think you have to just necessarily say, well, we need to add 3 weeks because it's remote. You need to be intentional, which is sort of where Noel started, about how you're using that time, and it can be done in the same span, certainly.
Yeah, it can be done in the same kind of like like you said, kind of first 3 weeks or so. But for the leaders or the hiring managers, they should definitely expect for it to take more of their time. I'm not finding that that's the case, sadly, because I think if you were able to do a comparison of, how do people feel about the onboarding process, pre-COVID versus in the last year, I'm not sure many of them are going to say it was better, maybe apart from not having to commute to the office. But certainly, I think, as kind of HR and people in the kind of the people side of the business, you've got to be kind of gearing, all right, I highly recommend gearing the hiring managers and the leaders up to be spending more time and clearing their calendars.
So I'm also curious, before I go to the next question, if anyone wants to type in the chat of if they actually joined a new organization right around when lockdown kicked in. So there's a question here. Where was it from Heather? That we were talking. I know Eric, you briefly mentioned buddies. So, what is an appropriate benefit or benefits to buddies for investing their time into new hires? I mentioned during my talk, like some companies would use it in the performance reviews, town halls. It would be mentioned. It's an incentive to build leadership skills. Some would even offer additional vacation days. So what do you feel would be appropriate benefit or benefits?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love buddies. I'm very passionate about that, being part of an organization's onboarding if possible. And I was also somebody that when Paul asked voluntary or mandatory, wrote voluntary, and I've run many programs where I've asked for volunteers, and it's a little tricky. People want to be rewarded for their time. I fully understand that. I do think there's some really strong implicit rewards by spotlighting those people for giving their time, treating them as leaders when they might not be in a leadership position. If they're a non-manager, non-leader, giving them the treatment as one, because they're now becoming one in a way. And also some latitude to build out that program, especially if you're starting it. Ask the people that have volunteered, if they have, to be buddies, what do you think it would take for this program to be successful, and see if they take up that challenge. I found many do, because they want to be part of building something. It's out of their day-to-day. It's unique. And that opportunity to be part of something, rather than you feeling like you have to design the whole program, give it some guardrails, let them come up with some ideas, really does inspire people to want to give some time to that, be successful as a buddy, and then think about the future of the program, which can help you out as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty anti kind of formal rewards on this. I think if you seek volunteers and you don't get them, I'd be kind of wanting to have a chat and look at culture and side of things, because, like Eric said there, I want people to want to help buddies coming in, because, they were new, they were new once too. So yeah, I'm not a big fan at all of kind of like formal rewards for it. There should be, inherent reward in doing it and helping people out. And that's the kind of culture that, most companies want to be building. And also then, as Eric said, there's great things you can do, recognition, things like that after the event. But yeah, I'd certainly hope that in most businesses, you don't have to offer a reward to get people to volunteer.
Perfect. Carla's just having oh, there she is. Perfect. Just having a bit of technical difficulties. Carla, did you hear the question at all and everything, or are you still there on that front?
Sorry, I missed it for a bit there.
Yeah, we're just what's the appropriate benefit or benefits to buddies for investing their time into new hires?
I really liked from your slide the idea that this is a tool for developing future leaders. So I think framing it in that way, I think is a really sort of powerful message, saying we're growing leaders within our organization. From the sort of extrinsic side of things, I think paying for lunch. Right now it's hard to go and take someone out for lunch or coffee or whatnot, but we've done something where we'll give everyone sort of a budget to go and order a meal. So you kind of have a Teams or Zoom meeting where each person is selected where they're going to get their delivery from, and but then you come together and you have a meal together still. So that I think is a nice kind of added little benefit, and kind of helps to bond. I mean, we work in the restaurant industry, so it's sort of critical that you're buying your meal from a squirrel site, and then you can have a conversation about that as well. But I think really the intrinsic side of like, this is something that's going to be meaningful. You're going to have an impact on other people. You're going to develop your leadership presence and qualities. Should be sort of first and foremost, with a little added, you get to have a lunch on the company or coffee or whatnot. It's icing on the cake.
So this is this question comes from Justin in the chat. This is an extension of what we just talked about with buddies. That what should the buddy do? Is it simply saying, "Hi, I'm your buddy. Let me know if you have any questions," or do you have some kind of structure for what the buddy provides? Yes, Carla, you briefly just talked a bit about that, but I'm typically more, like you said, just suggest something more just informal meetings, but maybe having like a basic outline of things. But I'm curious what you guys would suggest on that front.
I think in a big way, a buddy just represents somebody that a new person can feel free to ask any question to. Particularly if you're onboarding in a group, people have a fear of asking a dumb question. I wish they didn't. I have that. You're new. It's not a dumb question. It might seem dumb if you've been there for 2 years, but you're new. A buddy just gives that person that you can say, like, what is going on with that? Do I have to do that? Is that optional? Is somebody going to put me, to task if I don't do that on time? Does nobody care? Those real questions that are how you operate within an organization, but might go unsaid, unwritten, and then you might feel a little silly asking. If that's all you get out of a buddy, that's a huge role.
Yeah, I'd say the same. I think I would probably kind of have a bit of a cadence for it, so kind of 2, 3, maybe even 4 times in the first week, just kind of 10, 15 minutes or so. And there's every workplace has got like the kind of foibles, the little things that they're not written down in the HR manual. Where's the best coffee shop? Where's that? And a bit different if that's remote, but what are the benefits or the discounts that we get access to, or there's this thing where we do, we get a paid lunch every week. So just there are conversation topics that the buddy can use to kind of have a bit of conversation around it. And also I think it can be also really helpful for someone to guide you through like the organization chart in a sense, helping them signpost a little bit kind of who's who in a sense, in a more kind of conversational way. Because a lot of companies are like a village in a sense, right? It's not everyone does have a prescriptive role, but also, the baker might well sell, tinned goods as well, right? Like the local shop might do. And that's not written down in the org chart, right? And you have to talk to people about that. So they're the kinds of things that, in my experience, can go really well that a buddy can use, just kind of, again, giving them the signposting that, isn't necessarily written down anywhere.
Perfect. So here's another question from Heidi. When onboarding a new leader, what do you recommend doing differently or in addition to the standard onboarding? So I guess when Heidi, I'm thinking maybe more at like a senior level, vice president level, what would you do differently?
I can speak from experience on this one. And I think something that really helped me initially was I guess 2 things. One was innately in that type of role, you sort of have empowerment to reach out and start making connections with other leaders in the organization, and even skip level. If you're a VP or you're a director, you kind of have this ability to go and reach out to anyone and say, "Hey, I'm the new director. Can we have a 15-minute chat? Or I'd like to understand your role better." Whereas someone who's a little bit maybe newer or entry level role might not feel empowered to do so. So I think that's just innately something that exists for leadership. But I think from a more a company level, one of the things that I did within my first month or 2 was have some space at our town hall. We do a monthly town hall. And so I got to sort of get up in front of the organization, present my philosophy on people and culture, what my approach was, what people could expect from me over the next, few months as I get to know the organization, and really just kind of have that space to introduce myself and open a door to people. So that I think is really, important to have that space to introduce a new leader and give them the chance to share what the expectations are that people can have for them.
It's important to, if you're in the kind of the people function, it's important to get a really good handle on this new leader coming in. What is their view of remote work? I've had some very recent experience where a new leader in an organization kind of really kind of put a lot of fear in a lot of people because they were quite anti-remote work. And so they started talking about how, they couldn't wait to get everyone back in the office and to meet face to face. And, the workforce were there going, yeah, we're not thrilled about, doing an hour commute each way every day. So it's kind of important to, understand what their tone is, what their position is on things like that. And also be open about what the current tone of the organization is and the kind of the C-suite or below in that sense. But I think giving them a really good amount of support. I often find in organizations that, onboarding for kind of lower to mid-level roles is actually pretty good. But as soon as you kind of onboard and bring in kind of people that are managing other people and leaders, it just seems to kind of often drop off a cliff, and it's just assumed that, they can crack on and do. And I think now we're, much more in hybrid or remote, it's even more important than it was already.
It's a really great point. I really do agree that seems to be the general way that we've found that things have stabilized, that onboarding and training has gotten, over the last 5 years, really good at entry level and large scale onboarding for fast growing or big companies. But the leader level is still a little bit of a mystery. And often people fall down because sometimes it's different roles that want to take that on. And you might have a leadership development, again, in a big company versus a sort of training mechanism that's working on the entry level or lower level, maybe frontline managers, even for early leaders. I really agree with what Carla and Noel said, so I won't add too much. I want to go back. Paul made a really great point in his presentation, which I love, which is that sometimes in onboarding, you are also trying to let the person know that they made the right decision. And with leaders, that's probably more important than ever, maybe the most important thing that you can do, at least designing a training program, because a lot of what they'll learn through conversations, like Carla said, reaching out to other leaders, having lunch, virtual Zooms, whatever it might be with other leaders. So they're going to pick up some of that. You also know a little bit that the skill level of those people is not something you're going to have to train for out the gate, because they're probably coming in with the skills requisite for that position. Certainly the experience, when an entry-level person, like I brought up to begin with, you might have to train on internal tools that they might be using every day. I think one other piece I'd add, 5 years ago, if we were having this conversation, and remember a few of these, we talked about getting company values and what you stand, what you do internally for culture into training. I think we've gotten very good at that. The next stage that's happened over the last year is this idea of inclusion, diversity, some of those things. Like Noel said, was setting the tone for the culture. That's also something to get in with leaders. How are we doing that as an organization? And if your organization is serious about it, and some are, some aren't, how will that leader need to be part of that push and what that is, and giving them that context, whether it's a company announcement or just something that they might ask another leader so they can be part of that early on. So I'll add that piece. I think that's been the last 9 months and change, and moving forward is that piece for a lot of organizations.